I never thought signing a medical consent form would leave me feeling like I'd just handed over my body, my dignity, and my peace. "You have to do this. You're his mother." Tracy's breath was warm and close, her hand wrapped tight around mine as if she thought I might bolt. Her grip was not loving. It was an instruction, a command cloaked in pity. She leaned in, eyelashes flickering with staged concern, while her nails dug just enough to make her threat silent but felt. I looked down at the pen. It was shaking in my hand. Not because of age. I still drive at night, still dig weeds out the soil with firm fingers. It was shaking because my spirit knew something I hadn't caught up to yet. That I was being cornered. The walls of the pre-op room at Emory University Hospital were a sterile blue-gray, one of those colors that tries too hard to feel safe. A blood pressure cuff hissed on my arm. Machines beeped with the indifference of machinery. I had a gown on, my clothes folded neatly in a plastic bag beneath the cot, as if I'd already surrendered. I hadn't even seen Julian yet this morning. My own son. Just Tracy, fluttering in and out of the room like a nurse who doesn't really want to be assigned to your chart. The nurse, Janelle, her badge said, had caught my eye as I hesitated over the signature line. A pause that wasn't just about the form. It was a plea. A last-minute scan of the room for someone to notice what was happening. Her eyes lingered on mine for a breath too long. I saw it then. The flicker. A quiet clock, turning. She knew. I signed anyway. "Good?" Tracy said, exhaling like she'd just landed a deal. She snatched the paper and handed it to Janelle without so much as a thank you. "We're ready." The nurse didn't move. She slid the paper into the folder slowly, then patted my shoulder with a touch that felt more like warning than comfort. She said nothing, just walked out. It was 7:15 a.m. on October 3rd, 2024, the day I consented to donate my kidney, the day my body stopped being mine. I had an ID copy in the file, my Medicare card in my wallet, and no one had asked how I'd be getting home from the hospital, just that I show up fasted and on time. The surgical intake packet was tucked neatly in Tracy's handbag, like it belonged to her. After signing the form, I slipped out of the hospital gown and into my clothes in the tiny bathroom stall across from pre-op. The IV tape itched at my elbow and my back ached from the cot. I moved slowly, like someone decades older than I felt, each step deliberate, mechanical. I had asked for 10 minutes to gather myself, and Tracy had clicked her tongue like I was holding up traffic. Now I stood alone in the hallway, one foot planted in the present and the other dragging through 4 decades of service. I opened the voice memos app on my phone, pressed record. "My name is Celeste Parker. I'm 64 years old. I've worked 42 years straight and I've earned some damn peace." I said it low, steady. A truth spoken into that sterile corridor to remind myself I still existed, that I had not always been someone's patient or problem or afterthought. My voice caught near the end, not from tears. I'd cried enough silent ones this month, but from weariness. The kind that sits in your bones, that no vitamin D or gospel record can chase out. Julian was pacing just outside the double doors. I could see his figure through the frosted glass, shoulders tight, head bent over his phone. Not checking on me, not even pretending concern. Just annoyed I was taking too long. Like this was a dentist appointment he needed me to wrap up, so he could get back to whatever else he had planned. I used to call that boy my sunlight. Julian, born in the tail end of a stormy February, skin bright as copper, and laughter like wind chimes. I used to sleep with my hand on his chest, counting his breaths. Now, I wasn't sure if he'd notice if mine stopped. The hallway light flickered, fluorescent, too cold, too alive. I walked slowly toward him, my purse heavier than it should have been. It held my living will, tucked in the zippered side pocket, and my Medicare ID in the card slot. Not that anyone had asked to see it this morning. The decisions were being made around me, not with me. Tracy appeared again, her voice syrup-sweet. "We're all set?" I nodded. Didn't trust my mouth not to betray me. We turned down the corridor toward the renal wing, my son walking ahead now, never once looking back. 2 weeks before the surgery date, I was in my backyard garden, the one I'd been tending since before Julian's voice changed. The Cascade Heights sun was gentle, soft-edged in that mid-September way. My hydrangeas had finally taken to the soil after a stubborn summer. I was wrist-deep in compost, brushing mulch around the roots when my phone buzzed on the porch railing. A message from Tracy. Have you scheduled the lab work yet? No greeting. No emoji. Just the task. I wiped my hands on my apron and stared at it for a moment longer than I should have. There was no question mark, just a subtle command wrapped in digital tone, like she was following up on a pending invoice. Inside, I set the phone on the counter beside the grocery receipts from my morning run. I had just dropped $112 at Kroger for the church's Sunday food pantry. Canned beans, rice, cereal. Some of those small toiletries folks don't think to donate. I had made a note to tell Pastor Ed we needed more volunteers to sort things by expiration date. Last Sunday, one of the older members had nearly taken home sour milk. I busied myself slicing bell peppers and sweet potatoes, prepping a casserole for Sister Lorna, who just got out the hospital. I thought about replying to Tracy, but my thumbs hovered over the screen. Not yet. Planning to tomorrow. I typed, then deleted it. Why was I explaining myself? The text hung there unread while I pressed casserole into a foil pan and set the oven to 375. By the time I packed the car for the drop-off at New Light Baptist, I'd half convinced myself it didn't mean anything. Tracy was a nurse. Clinical tone came with the territory. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe it was me being sensitive. Pastor Ed met me at the church steps with his usual kind eyes. He helped me unload the bags, careful not to crush the bread. "You always bring the good stuff," he said, smiling. "Not just giving, but giving with thought." The night after that garden drop-off, I found myself pulling old folders from the cabinet in my dining room, the same one Julian used to sit under during thunderstorms when he was 5. I brewed a cup of chamomile, not because I needed it, but because the ritual made the quiet feel less empty. It started with one manila envelope, then another, then a few rubber-banded stacks I hadn't touched since Tracy's graduation. I laid them across the table and sat down hard, exhaling as if the chair had earned a confession. Co-signing. A word I once thought meant support now felt like a noose gently tightening. My signature appeared again and again. On Julian's first mortgage, the starter condo off North Druid Hills back in 2013. On Tracy's nursing school loans, private, high interest, the kind that came with slick brochures and buried clauses. I had helped them both because they'd asked through tears and promises. Julian's voice played in my mind. From that night 9 years ago when he called, voice cracking, "Mama, I wouldn't be a man without you." Back then, those words had struck gold inside me. They'd made every sacrifice feel holy. That call had come right after his second job fell through, and right before his credit dried up. "Just until I'm steady," he'd said. I believed him. The numbers were sharp now. $14,000 to help with Tracy's tuition and board over 3 years. $17,000 toward the down payment on that condo, which they later sold without telling me. That alone should have stung more than it did. I flipped through the Bank of America statements, highlighter in hand, as if clarity could be summoned by fluorescent ink. The entries were unmistakable. February 2015, March 2016, July 2019, transfers labeled family support that added up to more than I remembered giving. All told, $31,000. And still, they spoke to me like I owed them more, like those years didn't count because the ledger hadn't been carved in stone. Outside, the streetlights buzzed against the late September dusk. Inside, I felt the quiet judgment of my past selves, the one who thought generosity guaranteed love, the one who never asked for repayment because repayment meant keeping score. And I had raised Julian to believe we were more than numbers. By the next evening, I'd cleared off the desk in the spare bedroom, what used to be Julian's room, long before Tracy rearranged it into a guest suite with beige walls and no soul. I pulled out a legal pad and opened an old accordion file, the one I used to call just-in-case papers. Receipts, stubs, emails I'd printed because I had a habit of not trusting clouds to hold my memories. I sat there and did the math. Not just the big-ticket help, but the everyday rescues, the things I'd covered quietly without ceremony. 3 months of rent when Julian's consulting gig dried up, $2,100. The emergency plumber bill when their pipe burst, $875. Diapers and formula the year Caleb was born, and they forgot to apply for WIC, another $1,300. I wrote every line with care, not anger, just precision. Food? Too many grocery trips to count, but I conservatively tallied 12 years of weekly supplements, canned goods, fresh vegetables, pantry fill-ins, at roughly $35 a week. That was another $21,840. It all sat there in ink, $48,300. And that didn't include what I hadn't documented. The door creaked open behind me, and I turned to see the printer slowly ejecting Tracy's latest email. I'd set it to print on arrival. It was her response to my gentle note, saying I'd have to step back from helping for a bit. Getting older, I'd said, trying to watch my spending. You'll be repaid in love and family, that's what she wrote. In bold, as if it were currency. I held the page between my fingers and watched how the ink sank into the paper like permanence. Hollow words. Pretty phrases that sounded warm and familial, but landed like IOUs from a bank that had never once repaid its debts. I left the email out on the desk, beside the receipts and stubs, and underlined the total, $48,300 in 11 years. That night, I called Vanessa Roebuck, my friend of 30 years who'd once saved me from an IRS misfiling back in '97. She picked up on the second ring. You free to take a look at something for me, Nessa? Her tone shifted immediately. Of course. Bring it by tomorrow. And Celeste. Bring all of it. In her voice, I heard what I hadn't realized I needed. Not pity, not outrage, just someone willing to see it clearly. The morning before the clinic appointment, I drove across town to drop off my binder at Vanessa's. She promised to review the documents before our lunch on Friday. The air smelled like cut grass and burnt coffee, the kind of ordinary morning that fools you into believing life still follows your plan. I played a jazz station low on the radio and told myself I was just tired, not suspicious. That illusion cracked 3 nights later. I was at Julian and Tracy's townhouse in Buckhead, sitting on their white sectional while Tracy folded laundry. The smell of detergent was thick, too sweet. Julian was in the kitchen on speakerphone, his voice lowered but not low enough. I was half listening until I heard him say, almost laughing, "The transplant's gonna fix more than just my labs." Something in his tone stopped me cold. The kind of grin you can hear without seeing. Another man answered, maybe a friend from work, muffled through the speaker. "You serious, bro?" Julian chuckled. "It's complicated. Just gotta get it done." Then a pause, the sound of him noticing me in the doorway. His thumb darted to the phone, and the room dropped into a silence that stretched so long I could hear the washing machine ticking. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, just talking about recovery time. You shouldn't be up late, Ma. You need rest before your next labs." He said it with the same clipped patience he used when Caleb asked too many questions. I nodded, pretending to believe him, pretending not to notice the sheen of sweat across his temple. I left a few minutes later, saying I needed to feed my cat. My hands shook on the steering wheel all the way home, a tremor I hadn't felt since the night I signed his student loan forms. I parked under the streetlight, sat there for a long time, and replayed the tone in his voice, the calculation hidden inside it. Later, while washing my face, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The lines around my mouth looked deeper, not from age, but restraint. I whispered aloud what my heart already knew. Whatever this transplant meant to them, it wasn't just about health. By the time Thursday rolled around, I was sitting in a waiting room I hadn't planned to be in, clutching a clipboard I hadn't agreed to receive. The Emory Renal Clinic smelled like plastic and peppermint. I hadn't scheduled this blood work. Someone else had. The nurse called my name, and before I could stand, Tracy appeared beside me like a shadow materializing out of thin air. "Glad you made it," she said, all brightness and clinical charm. "We're fast-tracking everything. Less stress that way." I blinked. "I didn't confirm anything." "This wasn't on my calendar." She smiled tighter. "Julian said you'd be fine with it. It's just labs. Just labs. Just a body. Just a kidney." The nurse at the check-in counter looked up. "Carla," her name tag read, and then down again, too quickly. I followed Tracy through the corridor, my purse thumping against my hip with every step. The silence between us stretching wider than the white walls. Inside the room, I sat on the exam table while Tracy spoke to the nurse as if I weren't there. "We need this expedited," she said, flipping through a folder. "We're behind on the cross-match timeline." Carla didn't respond right away. She glanced at me, then at Tracy, then back to me. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. "I'll be right back," she murmured. When she returned, Tracy had stepped into the hallway to take a call. Carla leaned in slightly and slipped a folded piece of paper into my coat pocket. "Be careful," she whispered. then turned away before I could speak. Back in the car, parked under the overhang with rain starting to patter on the windshield, I opened the note. It was a printed email, Tracy's name at the top, dated the day before. Subject: urgent. Expedite labs for Celeste Parker. Pre-op deadline approaching. Patient not to be delayed. My name, my tests, my insurance, my body. But no one had asked me. That night, I logged into my patient portal and saw new entries I hadn't authorized. Labs processed, imaging scheduled, notes about donor readiness. The language was efficient, sanitized. The next morning, I called the clinic to ask for copies. They said I'd need to request them through the admin office. Tracy had already been listed as my emergency contact. Saturday morning, I opened my mailbox expecting junk ads and a few utility bills. What I found instead was a thick envelope from Blue Cross. The logo alone gave me pause. I hadn't filed any claims recently, hadn't even been to the doctor except for the labs they pushed on me. I opened it right there on the porch, keys still in hand, breeze ruffling the hem of my robe. Denial of claim. Policyholder, Celeste Parker. Procedure date, August 18th, 2024. Location, Monterrey, Mexico. I blinked at the page. A procedure I never had. A claim I never submitted. And a balance due of $22,000 for a failed transplant surgery, listed under Julian's name, with my insurance marked as the secondary payer. It hit like ice down my spine. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling so badly the coffee sloshed in its mug. The letter detailed the whole failed out-of-network ordeal, Julian's trip in August, which I'd been told was a wellness retreat. There were no reimbursements. Blue Cross flagged it as an attempted fraud, and the remaining balance was pending review. I barely had time to reread it before the front door opened. Julian stood in the entryway, breathless like he'd jogged from his car. "Ma, listen, don't freak out. It's just paperwork." He was waving his hand like he was brushing away a bad smell. I held up the letter without a word. His face shifted. Less panic, more calculation. He stepped forward, voice low. "It's a mistake. I put your info down because they said I needed a secondary. That's all. You weren't going to be charged." I stared at him. "You used my policy, without telling me, for an unauthorized surgery in another country." "It wasn't like that," he said, but his eyes darted away. I stood up slowly. My bones felt ancient, but my voice didn't waver. "You had no right to drag my name into your mess." Julian exhaled hard. "You're making this bigger than it is." "No, Julian," I said, holding the denial letter between us. "You already did that." Later that afternoon, I called the Blue Cross hotline. The woman on the line confirmed it. My information had been used fraudulently. She suggested I file a fraud report. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there in the quiet. Sunday came with a stillness that didn't belong to the Sabbath, the kind of hush that wraps around you when you're about to do something you know you'll regret. I arrived at New Light Baptist just before service, nodding to Sister Claudine at the door, pressing a casserole into her hands without really hearing her thanks. My mind was miles away. I slid into the back pew, the one nearest the exit, and let the hymns wash over me. The choir swayed with practiced rhythm, but the music didn't move me. My thoughts circled one thing: peace. The false kind. The temporary kind. The kind that only lasts if you stay quiet. In my purse, folded beneath the church bulletin, was the surgery clearance form. I had signed it the night before, hands trembling under the kitchen light. I hadn't told Vanessa. I hadn't told Pastor Ed. I hadn't even told myself the whole truth. I told myself I was tired, that I was just trying to avoid more fighting, that maybe a clean sacrifice would settle things, give my son a chance, give Tracy an outlet to finally stop looking at me like I owed her my organs along with my past. Pastor Ed's sermon was on endurance, on knowing the difference between divine patience and human passivity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I clutched the form in my lap, my fingers curling around the edges like it might slip away. After the benediction, Pastor Ed made his usual slow rounds, greeting congregants with a smile that never felt rushed. When he reached my pew, his hand rested gently on my shoulder. "You look heavy this morning, Sister Celeste?" I didn't deny it. "Could we pray?" We moved to the side hallway, beside the stained glass window of Ruth gleaming in the field. He bowed his head, began softly, "Lord, give her clarity, Not just strength, but vision. Let no sacrifice be made in confusion or guilt. When I looked up, his eyes lingered on mine longer than usual. He said nothing else, but I knew he saw more than I had spoken. That evening, Tracy posted a photo on Instagram. Her, Julian, and Caleb smiling in front of their house. The caption read #Fate and Family Wins with 3 red hearts. I stared at that screen a long time. That was the moment I decided this wouldn't be the end of the story. Not for me. The hospital cafeteria smelled of bleach and microwaved pasta. It was October 2nd, the morning before the surgery. I sat alone at a small corner table, trying to stomach a bowl of lukewarm soup. My appetite had packed its bags weeks ago. I had just started to rise when I felt a small tug at my sleeve. "Grandma?" Caleb's voice was soft, unsure. I smiled, masking my surprise. "Hey, baby? What are you doing down here? Mom said I could get a snack. I saw you from the hallway." He slipped into the seat across from me, clutching a juice pouch like a lifeline. His legs swung under the chair. I waited for him to chatter about school or a new game on his tablet. Instead, he leaned forward, eyes too serious for a 9-year-old. "Grandma, I saw Daddy take some pills." I blinked. "What kind of pills?" "He said they they don't test right." He looked down quickly, as if he'd done something wrong just by saying it aloud. My heart dropped. "When did you hear that?" "Last week." He didn't see me. He was in the bathroom with the door halfway open. I was going to ask for a Band-Aid, but then I heard him talking to himself. I sat back, my soup forgotten. What else did he say? Nothing. Just that. And then he flushed something. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry. I reached across the table and held his little hand, which was warm and damp with nervous energy. Before I could gather my thoughts, Tracy appeared at the cafeteria entrance, scanning the room. Her eyes landed on us. She moved quickly, her smile tight. "There you are," she chirped, bending low to take Caleb's arm. "Come on, sweetie. Grandma needs to rest." He hesitated, then stood. "Bye, Grandma." "Bye, baby," I said, voice barely above a whisper. They disappeared down the hall. My fingers fumbled for my phone. I opened the voice memo app and hit record, still shaking. I spoke softly. "Caleb saw Julian take pills to manipulate test results. Said the words so they don't test right." I saved the file, dated it, backed it up to the cloud. Everything changed in that moment. Whatever I'd tried to excuse, ignore, or downplay evaporated in the wake of my grandson's trembling voice. This wasn't confusion. This was deceit. And now I had a witness. The morning of October 3rd, the sky over Emory was slate gray. Rain had passed through overnight, and the sidewalks still held puddles in the cracks. I stood outside the hospital's patient admin office, my hands clenched in my coat pockets, Caleb's voice playing on loop in my mind. The decision had settled overnight like cooled steel. I wouldn't be used. Not by the people I raised, not under the guise of love. Inside, the receptionist gave me a soft smile, the kind reserved for patients who look like they might cry. I didn't. I asked to speak with a patient advocate. A few minutes later, a woman named Ms. Tran welcomed me into a small office, lined with resource pamphlets and a potted plant that had seen better days. "How can I help you, Ms. Parker?" "I need to cancel my consent for the transplant," I said, laying my folder on the desk. "Effective immediately," she blinked. "Have you spoken to your surgical team?" "They've spoken at me. I've signed forms I didn't fully agree to. But today, I'm revoking them." She nodded slowly and pulled her laptop closer. "We'll need to update your file and submit a formal revocation to the transplant coordinator. Are you sure?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I've never been surer." Ms. Tran typed steadily, her demeanor shifting from polite to protective. "We'll flag your profile. No further actions will be taken without your explicit approval." I handed her my ID, and while she scanned it, I logged into the hospital portal on my phone. I changed the password, updated my PIN, and removed Tracy's name from the emergency contact field. A confirmation email pinged in moments. Subject: access settings updated. PIN changed. Consent revoked. By the time I left the office, the rain had started again. Just a light mist, enough to blur the parking lot, but not my vision. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, phone in hand. Tracy's text came in before I turned the ignition. "You'll regret this." "No." "Hi, Celeste." "No." "Are you okay?" Just a digital snarl. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the confirmation email to myself, Vanessa, and my secure cloud folder. Then I deleted every medical contact they'd ever had access to. The chain had been broken, quietly, thoroughly. The next morning, I parked at the West End branch of the Fulton County Library, my old leather tote heavier than usual with folders. The printer there was always temperamental, but it asked no questions and left no digital footprints. That mattered now. I wasn't just withdrawing. I was preparing. I logged in at a corner terminal and plugged in my flash drive. Tina, the librarian with soft locks and silver hoops, looked up from the front desk and gave me a small nod. She'd known me for years, mostly as the woman who always returned cookbooks late. Today, I handed her a stack of print jobs. "Got something cooking?" she joked. "Something like that," I said. The files were organized. Tracy's email to the renal nurse about rushing my labs. My own patient records showing dates I hadn't approved. Insurance entries listing me as a payer for out-of-country procedures. All printed in triplicate. I cross-checked every page before slipping them into labeled folders. There was one entry I didn't expect. A pre-certification form filed under my name, dated September 4th, before I'd even completed my blood work. It had Julian's initials scrawled at the bottom, not a signature. Just a lazy JRP in a checked box next to donor approved. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Fraud wasn't a word I'd ever thought would circle my son, but there it was, typed in blue beside billing code 58262. Kidney transplant, living donor, filed with insurance, never discussed with me. "Need to scan these too?" Tina asked, coming over with a flash drive of her own. Yes, backup and backup's backup. She helped me convert them into PDFs and stored them on a fresh USB. I could keep separate from the one in my purse. "Put this somewhere no one else has access to," she said, sliding it into a small envelope. I nodded. "You don't need to know the details, but thank you." "I don't," she said, then paused. "But I know what it looks like when someone starts gathering receipts instead of just asking questions." Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves scraped across the sidewalk like dry whispers. I drove straight to Vanessa's after. She opened the door before I knocked, saw the folders in my arms, and stepped aside. "Come in. Looks like we've got a lot to sort." And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Vanessa's home office smelled faintly of lemon oil and printer toner, the comforting scent of order and old-school diligence. I spread the folders across her wide oak desk, letting each labeled tab speak for itself. "I brought everything," I said. "Emails, forms, printouts, what I could trace." She flipped through the first set without speaking, her brows narrowing slightly, her lips tightening. When she reached the Blue Cross denial letter, she let out a sharp breath. "They used your policy for a failed international procedure?" she asked, not needing the answer. "This isn't just desperate, it's deliberate." I nodded. "I've revoked all permissions, changed my portal, locked down my access." Vanessa pulled her reading glasses lower on her nose and reached for her laptop. "Good. Now we make a clean digital backup. And Celeste, I'm filing a separate fraud alert with the IRS. I've handled their taxes before. I recognized the pattern the moment I saw this." She slid over a return from 2022. "They filed joint but claimed caregiving credits using your social security number. That's a federal offense." I stared at the page. "I never gave them permission." "You didn't have to. They already had your ID, remember, from when you co-signed on Julian's mortgage." That realization hit me harder than I expected. I had thought the emotional cost was the whole story, but the paper trail was longer, darker. By noon, we had compiled a digital folder labeled Celeste Parker Protected Assets and saved it on 2 drives and a locked Dropbox folder. I forwarded the folder to myself and to Dawn Hale, the elder law attorney Vanessa recommended. Then I made 2 more calls. Pastor Ed answered on the second ring. "Celeste, I've been praying on you." "Pastor, I need your witness. I'll explain everything in person." "Say no more. Come by tomorrow after morning meetings." The third call was to Nurse Carla. I thanked her again for the lab printout and asked if she'd be willing to confirm the expedited lab order Tracy pushed through. "I remember it clear," Carla said. "You weren't the one asking. She was. I'll write it down. 3 people. 3 truths. All willing to stand in the light with me." I ended the day in my own kitchen, sipping peppermint tea. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I had a team. And I had proof. On October 6th, I stepped into the notary's office off Old National Highway, with my shoulders squared and my folder clasped tight against my chest. The building was quiet, the waiting room dim, with a slow ceiling fan slicing through the late afternoon warmth. The woman behind the glass partition looked up, nodded once, and buzzed me through. Attorney Dawn Hale met me inside. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, but there was a sharpness to her that made you feel protected, like she'd already thought 5 moves ahead. "Celeste," she said, standing to greet me. "Vanessa briefed me. I've reviewed everything. We're going to do this carefully." I laid the revocation documents on her desk. The financial power of attorney Julian had held since 2018. The HIPAA forms Tracy had slipped into a hospital clipboard sometime last year. There had been no dramatic moment when I gave them that access. It had happened slowly, through convenience and misplaced trust. Dawn flipped through each page with methodical precision, red-penned a couple of notes, and then pulled out fresh forms. "This will revoke all prior powers," she explained. "Effective immediately. I'll file a certified copy with Fulton Probate Court. We'll also notify your bank, insurance providers, and the hospital." I signed where she pointed, hand steady, signature full. Each pen stroke felt like reclaiming a corner of my own life. As she affixed the notary seal, the gold sticker catching the low light, I felt a quiet click inside me, like something had finally locked into place. I wasn't doing this in anger. I wasn't punishing. I was protecting. When we finished, she slid the completed forms into a slim red envelope. "Keep this copy," she said, "and give one to Vanessa. I'll send the rest." As I stood, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from Julian, time-stamped just after noon. "This is war, Ma." 5 words. No context. No apology. No hesitation. I didn't play it again. Instead, I turned to Dawn. "Can you help me change my deed, too? I want to add a stipulation about who inherits the house." She nodded, already making a note. "You're not the first mother to sit in that chair." I left with my envelope in hand, my name intact, and my boundaries, finally, in ink. Let them call it war. I called it peace. A week later, on October 13th, the fellowship hall buzzed with post-service chatter and the scent of leftover sweet rolls. Folding chairs scraped across the tile as congregants settled into their usual corners. Choir members in the back, ushers near the coffee urn, Sister Geraldine already opening her purse Bible like another sermon might break out. I had barely taken my seat when Tracy's voice cut through the room like a rehearsed monologue. "Y'all, I just want to say something real quick," she called out, stepping forward with the faux humility of someone staging concern. Julian was right behind her, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes flicking to the floor. The room quieted. Even Pastor Ed, mid-conversation, turned. "We're worried about Celeste," Tracy began, looking around as if gathering sympathy. "She's been confused lately, saying things that don't make sense, accusing us of awful things." She clutched a manila folder to her chest like it was a newborn. "She revoked Julian's power of attorney, but only because she's being influenced. She's not herself." I stood before I meant to. The words were already rising in me, but I waited. I watched. "She's hallucinating," Tracy said, tears blooming perfectly in her eyes. "We've done everything to support her. We tried to protect her, even helped with her finances for years." There it was, the inversion, the switch. The gaslight turned all the way up. Tracy opened her folder and pulled out a single page, waving it slightly. "She already consented to the transplant. This is a notarized copy. We were just trying to save a life." Deacon Harold, filming a youth announcement at the side of the room, turned his phone discreetly toward her. I saw the red recording dot blink to life. Pastor Ed raised both hands gently. "Tracy, Julian, let's not make judgments in whispers or half-truths. If there's concern, let's bring it into the light. Celeste?" I took a slow breath and stepped forward, past the coffee urn, past Sister Geraldine's wide-eyed silence. My shoes echoed on the tile, steady as a heartbeat. I nodded once. "I'll speak." Julian muttered something I couldn't make out. His hand clenched into a fist at his side. I looked at the room. The same room where I'd led coat drives, organized meals, taught Sunday lessons to children now grown. These walls knew me, and they would witness the truth. I walked to the front of the room, past folding chairs and open mouths, the red envelope tucked neatly beneath my arm. Caleb sat near the edge of the crowd, his legs swinging, eyes wide but steady. When he saw me pause, he stood up and came to my side without being asked. His presence, silent and small, gave me ballast. "First," I said, my voice stronger than I expected, "I am not confused. I am not hallucinating, and I have not forgotten how to read forms or recognize deceit when it sits in my living room wearing family's face." I pulled the envelope open and began laying items on the long folding table Pastor Ed had cleared. Each document had a label, each page a weight. "This is the consent revocation I filed last week, signed, time-stamped, and confirmed by Emery's patient advocate. My body is not available for donation." I held up the second form. "This is a screenshot of Tracy's email to a nurse demanding they expedite lab work I never agreed to." Third, the insurance denial letter. "This letter is from Blue Cross. It outlines a $22,000 claim filed under my name for a procedure I didn't authorize, in a country I haven't visited in over a decade. My son used my insurance ID to cover his failed transplant attempt." A hush settled in like morning fog. "And this?" I tapped my phone and played the audio. Caleb's voice, high and trembling, speaking the truth no one asked of him. "Daddy took pills. He said it's so they don't test right." Caleb's fingers curled around mine. I nodded at him. "Thank you, baby." The room remained frozen. Even Tracy had lost her composure, blinking rapidly, jaw slack. Julian's arms were crossed now, body rigid, eyes darting like he was calculating exits. Pastor Ed stepped forward slowly, his eyes sweeping the papers, then settling on me. "And all this," he asked gently, "has been verified?" I nodded. "By my CPA, my nurse advocate, and my attorney. There are backup drives with every document, copies filed with the necessary authorities." I turned back to the congregation. "They told you I was unstable, but I've never been clearer." Behind me, the projector flickered on. Deacon Harold had uploaded the documents to the screen, every page enlarged and undeniable. This was no longer a private wound. It was a public reckoning. Pastor Ed picked up the first sheet from the table, the affidavit Vanessa had helped me prepare. He adjusted his glasses, voice calm but unwavering. "This document, signed and witnessed, outlines the use of Celeste Parker's insurance information without consent. It details unauthorized claims, false medical records, and evidence of identity misuse." He read each line slowly, letting the gravity of the words settle. People leaned in. No one moved. When he finished, he handed it to Deacon Harold, who scanned it into the church's official archive, then nodded. Next, Nurse Carla stood from the back row and walked forward. Her Emory badge still hung from her lanyard, swinging as she moved. "I was present when Tracy insisted on fast-tracking Ms. Parker's labs. I remember the email. I printed it because something felt wrong. Ms. Parker never spoke. It wasn't her request. She wasn't even scheduled that day. She placed the original printout on the table, the timestamp circled in red. The room gasped softly, not at the form, but at its clarity. You can't reason with timing. You can't deny signatures." Caleb was still beside me, his little chest rising fast. I knelt slightly, squeezed his hand, and whispered, "You did good." Pastor Ed looked at Tracy, whose hands now gripped the edge of a chair. Her face, flushed earlier with performative panic, had turned pale. "Tracy," he said, "you presented a notarized consent form to this congregation. Can you tell us who notarized it?" She swallowed. It was scanned from the clinic. I don't remember who." Dawn Hale stepped into the room then, late but precise. She wore a charcoal gray pantsuit and held her credentials in one hand. "I reviewed that document," she said, her voice cutting clean. "It was forged. The notary number traces back to an expired license. Filed out of sequence. Whoever submitted it committed fraud." Gasps turned to murmurs. Sister Geraldine crossed herself. Brother Thomas shook his head and whispered, "Lord, have mercy." I stepped back, letting the evidence speak. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was an unveiling. The projector flashed again, scanned statements, patient portal logs, tax filings, with my name misused. Deacon Harold moved through them with a steady hand, his voice narrating each with the solemnity of Scripture. Then, Finally, Pastor Ed said what sealed it all. We will be reporting this today, on behalf of Miss Parker and in defense of truth. By the morning of October 15th, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but not hollow. The silence now had weight, the kind earned by boundary, not absence. I stood on the porch with a ring of brass keys in my palm, still cool from the night air. Dawn had delivered them that morning, tied with a deep green ribbon and a note in her confident looping script. Just for you, Celeste. I'd changed the locks, front and back. The garage keypad was reprogrammed. The old spare hidden in the planter had been tossed. The deed now carried a new clause: transfer upon death to Caleb, along with a plot of raised garden beds I'd once joked would be my second burial site. Inside, I placed the keys in the ceramic dish by the entryway, just under the photo of my grandmother holding a bushel of greens from her Alabama farm. Her eyes, like mine, told stories no caption could contain. Julian's accounts had been frozen the day before, after Officer Jennings from Atlanta PD's Elder Abuse Unit came to the church with a clipboard and a quiet nod of acknowledgement. The words identity theft and medical fraud carried weight. Legal proceedings would stretch ahead, but for the first time, that wasn't mine to handle. I had given the truth. I had made it visible. In the kitchen, I opened the back door to let in the morning air. Caleb's old garden tools leaned near the doorframe: small spades, rubber gloves with frayed fingertips, a watering can dented on one side from when he'd stepped on it chasing a squirrel. I had wrapped them carefully the night before, tied with a red ribbon, and placed them in a labeled box. Caleb's tools. For planting and for truth. Vanessa was coming by to help update my will. We'd add Caleb as a beneficiary, not just of the house, but of the accounts I'd guarded and the stories I'd lived through. He was young, but he knew already that love without truth was just decoration, and I'd rather leave him dignity than silence. I poured a fresh cup of tea and sat in my robe as light filtered across the floor. Not a triumphant ending, no swelling music, just breath, just time, just stillness earned. I didn't gloat, I planted, and this time, only the right roots would take.